My name's Tom, and this is my best friend Abraham. Abraham is an ex-Muslim international athlete who makes me look tiny. I'm literally average height. I'm a young professional who dabbles in some pretty mediocre stand-up comedy.
Does that really deserve a clap?
Together, we have this shared conviction that the Christian worldview stands up to scrutiny, makes sense of the world around us, and offers us the antidote we all long for. We're convinced that respectful dialogue and the free exchanging of ideas will lead the truth to prevail. We set up this YouTube channel as a place that allows worldviews to collide so that we don't have to. We want to ground philosophical arguments for God's existence, Christian theology, and history within the cultural moment so that the great thinkers of the past can be accessible in the present. Whether you're Christian or non-Christian, we hope you'll subscribe and stick around to see how our journey unfolds.
Well, hey!
Welcome. Well, hey!
Sorry we're a couple of minutes late. It was by virtue of my mic hacking in at the last second.
No. Well, here we go. So, Tom.
But we're here now.
Yeah. Tom, tell us what we're going to be looking at today. What's the topic? What's the title of this video?
So the title, we went for some kind of clickbait variation of the new atheists are wrong about science. So the new atheists, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris in particular, they made this claim that the scientific method has been in conflict with Christianity, and they especially argue about historic cases of clash between the two. They do so with sort of complete ignorance of the scientific consensus on the development of the scientific method and the positive influence that Christianity has had on that. So that's what we're kind of going to be presenting in a nutshell today.
Nice. Should we get started?
Well, should we? Let us know if you're here first of all. Let's make some small talk. We're British. We have small talk first. So if you're in the chat to us. Let us know where you're watching from, whether you have the football on at the same time as this. We won't be offended if your attention is slightly distracted. But yeah, let us know where you're watching from and how you do it. But I guess I've got a quick story about Christianity and the scientific method to start.
Go on.
I once met John Lennox. Basically, yeah, the football's on. I'm not surprised. Yeah, I once met John Lennox. Basically, he was giving some talks at an event I was at, and I thought, this guy, he did a good job in the Beatles, didn't he? Nah. Yeah, so he was sat in this tent, and because he's an old man, isn't he? He's like in his 80s now. He was like sat in a chair, like resting, and like naive 20-year-old Tom thought, this is a brilliant time to go and like banter him and like have some like philosophical discussion about something or other. So I went over, and I quickly realised he was not up for bantering on that day. He was like half asleep on his chair, like. I think he'd given a few talks that day, so he was tired. And I mean, he's an old man. Like he's old. Like he needs to rest. Like he was half asleep, but I started going to banter him. He just had none of it completely. And then I said, "Look, I've got a quick question for you, Dr. Lennox." And he said to me, I remember these words. I'll never forget these words. He said, "There may be such thing as a quick question, but there's no such thing as a quick answer."
No.
And I said, well, let's give it a try. So I asked my question anyway, despite every like predisposition telling me to stop. I asked my question, and he gave me like a two-sentence answer. And I said, I knew you were lying. There is such thing as a quick answer. And he said, yeah. And I said, nice to meet you, Dr. Lennox. And I left. So there you go. I've interacted with the foremost expert on this topic, according to the Diary of the CEO, #1 Christian expert in the world. Also, #1 Christian expert is West Half. So that makes me, by virtue of having met John Lennox, also #1 Christian expert. So get that in the title, Mr. CEO.
Oh man. Well, I'm excited because this is not my area of expertise at all. So I'm going to be learning as well with you guys, because I mean I know some of this, but it's only because I've watched Tom's videos that he's posted on here. By the way, if you haven't watched those videos, make sure you watch those videos. The first video we did is really, really useful. It's why young men are becoming Christian. But actually, the other video is more along the lines of this one. Do you want to explain that one?
Yeah, so I gave a talk at UCI. I gave a lecture on this topic, basically. It was condensed down to 20 minutes or so. But if you want a condensed version of this in 20 minutes, how has Christianity led to the development of the scientific method in the West?
Yeah.
That's the lecture to go for. So that's on our channel. It didn't get many views because we tried to get AI to make a thumbnail.
Oh, it was so nax.
It was terrible. I don't know why we even used it, but he's far better than AI.
Yeah, I actually am. Everyone, let's get W's in the chat for Omar, who has just come in in the chat. Come on. Oh man. How's it going? Are you still in America? Anyways, while he's typing.
So, yeah. He's got to type it out. It takes a while. Yeah, should we get started then?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay.
Go for it.
So, if you guys are aware of sort of Richard Dawkins' beliefs, Richard Dawkins said a lot of things like this. So, believing in religion means to forgo the spiritual joy of a scientific understanding of life in favor of a primitive, superstitious supernaturalism. You'll find in these Richard Dawkins quotes, he's incredibly poetic, and I think one of the reasons why he sold so well is his ability to write more than his philosophical arguments. So he's saying here, this is one of the places where he claims that there's a dichotomy. There's the two are diametrically opposed. So believing in a religion means foregoing any kind of scientific understanding of the universe, as though you have one or the other. Another thing he said, fundamentalist religion is hell-bent on ruining scientific education of countless of thousands of innocent, well-meaning, eager minds. So for Richard Dawkins, it's not just that the worldviews are diametrically opposed, it's that religion itself, or the institutions that come with religion, the people that religion breeds, are the kinds of people that trample over well-meaning, eager minds.
Why don't you change your audio to the other one?
Okay, let's see how that goes. Okay.
That's probably my fault, guys, because I told him it was better. Apparently, it's worse.
What are we saying? Is this good?
Yeah, that's so much better.
Is it?
It's so much louder. Yeah. Is that better?
So, where was I? So, basically, all I've said so far, if you haven't been able to hear me, is that Richard Dawkins believes that the worldview of the Christianity is diametrically opposed to the worldview of the scientific worldview. And also, it's not just that individuals have to give up the scientific method to become a Christian, it's that they produce institutions, they become religious people that trample on scientific education. So it's not just the individuals that give it up, but it harms the science of society at large.
So
it looks like my audio is better now. Okay, thank you guys. Let's go. I have a quick question. If you spent any amount of time on Reddit, you will have seen a graph like this. It's the claim that the new atheists held to, is that you have the beginnings of the underpinnings of the scientific method in the Greco-Roman world. The Greeks, with all of their intelligence, Plato and Aristotle, they started to develop the scientific method. and then comes in the Dark Ages. We'll come to that term later, but the Dark Ages, where the scientific method was shackled by religion, and then comes the enlightened ones who bring light into the Dark Ages. So the Age of Enlightenment, where you throw off the shackles of religion, and then you have the rapid scientific revolution. That's sort of what you hear. That's what the New Atheists believe. That's what you see in Reddit. We're going to find out today that the scientific consensus in historical studies show that this isn't particularly accurate. So a good way, sort of, I think the crux of the matter when it comes to Richard Dawkins' view on the scientific method is probably found in this quote here. So he says, "What I, as a scientist, believe, I believe not because of reading a holy book, but because I have studied the evidence." One of the claims that Richard Dawkins makes is that to anything that can be known, or anything that you should know, is known through the scientific method. So he gets all of his information by studying the evidence. This view is actually, it isn't what the scientific method teaches. So his view is more something called scientism, which we're going to look into now. So to show that, before we sort of respond to some of the things that Richard Dawkins have said, it's important to establish, what do we mean when we talk about the scientific method? Because I think Richard Dawkins, when he talks about science, is talking about something called scientism, which is quite different to what the scientific method actually is. Before we go into that, any clarification questions, Abraham?
Wait, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was just checking. So you said that Richard Dawkins thinks that you can't be, you can't have religion. So like religion and like science are like mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
So like, does that mean that would he say that like you can't be a Christian and be a scientist?
In some ways. So he would say that most scientists aren't Christians because the two are mutually exclusive, and any Christians that are scientists are just sort of like compromising on essential beliefs that they should hold to so that they can do science. Okay,
fine.
So he would say you can have a Christian scientist, but it would be a contradiction of terms.
Okay, cool. I mean, I'm interested to see what you say here, because that's quite interesting. Like, so I guess what you're going to say next is like, Richard Dawkins, by saying what he says, is appealing to something called scientism rather than science. So what's the difference between the two?
Yeah. So that leads us perfectly onto this. So science is, so we've got a few quotes here: the systematic study of the natural world and its physical and biological processes through observation, identification, description, experimental investigation, and theoretical explanations. So the scientific method is all about observation and sort of testing and running experiments so that you can create theoretical explanation to understand the universe. So there's a few different components here that make science science. So it's things like, it's got to be organized or systematic. So it's got to build upon prior discoveries and knowledge. In the medieval period, you had like monks who would go and study the butterflies. They weren't really doing science, because all they were doing was they'd like write down all of the features of the butterflies and their wings and things like that. It was scientific in the sense it was observations, but they weren't necessarily building on prior knowledge, and they weren't bringing forward theoretical explanations of the universe. So the scientific method is all of those things. When we talk about the scientific method, it isn't the ability to build bridges. It isn't mathematics. It isn't the laws of logic. It isn't going in your garden and looking at butterflies. it's this sort of more rigid category of systematic study with observations, experiments, and using those to create theoretical explanations of the universe.
Cool.
So with that in mind,
yeah, I was gonna say, what's scientism?
So scientism is the view that the scientific method is the only way to gain information about the world. So I've got a few quotes from different philosophers of science here. Defining what is real as that which can be discovered by quite specific methods of investigation. So what is real is dictated by what you can find in a test tube. You would need to look into a microscope or a telescope and be able to see it. Scientism would be the view that that kind of knowledge is all knowledge. So you see that in the second quote. The view that all real knowledge is scientific knowledge. And what needs to be important here is that scientism is often confused with science itself, which is, I think, what Richard Dawkins tends to do. He says that the Christian worldview is opposed to science, but he's actually saying he holds the view that science is scientism. So he's saying that the Christian worldview is opposed to scientism, which is true. I can grant that the Christian worldview does not have within it anything that would say the only way to gain knowledge about the universe is through scientific study. So he's right in that regard. And if that's what science is, then you could not have a Christian scientist. But as the quote at the bottom, Eric Martin, who's written quite extensively as a philosopher of science on this subject, he says, defenders of scientism are not necessarily scientists, and critics of scientism are not necessarily critics of science. Scientism is a philosophy and worldview about science that does not correlate with any particular scientific activities. Do you have any follow-ups on that?
Yeah. So why do you think that Richard Dawkins appeals to scientism and not to science? Where is he going wrong?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that. I think there's a number of things that's happening. I think because he's got a commitment to like a really strict naturalism, where nothing exists but matter in motion, that's important because there can't be immaterial realities that exist. So he's like, if anything's true, I must study it.
Right.
So that's one side of the coin. The other, I just think it's a particularly useful like rhetoric to say, I'm pro-science, anti-religion. If I like you saw in the quote I read, if something is worth knowing, I know it through the evidence, not because of a holy book. I like evidence. I'm a man of evidence. That's what he always saying. And what he's like bringing into the door and through the back door is that anything that is worth knowing is scientific knowledge. And I don't think that's true for a number of reasons. And we can go through them. Before I've got a quote, Bertrand Russell. This might be another place in which Richard Dawkins' scientism comes from. Bertrand Russell is like the father of new atheism. He's the old atheism. He's the one they all looked up to. He was the big champion of atheism in the time period before the new atheists. He says, whatever knowledge is attainable must be attainable by scientific methods. And what science cannot discover, mankind cannot know. Yeah. So he was explicitly like, he believed in scientism, which was more popular in his generation. So in philosophy, you have an empiricist sort of movement where a lot of people held to these kinds of views. Philosophers of science today don't really hold to scientism to the same extent, or if they do hold to it today, it would be a far more nuanced version than the one that Bertrand Russell had.
How so? Can you talk about those different discrepancies? Because I don't actually see what's the difference between scientism and science?
So the scientific method is systematic studies using observations to explain the universe.
Right.
Oh, Spain are 1-0 up. Oh my days.
I can't believe it.
Yeah, so science is explanations of the universe using data. Scientism is the philosophical view that is the only way to get any knowledge about the universe.
So how would other ways to get knowledge? What are other ways to get knowledge about the universe?
Logical inference would be one. So should we go through some things that the scientific method cannot explain?
Oh, I haven't. I kind of understand now where you're coming from. So hold on a minute. So you're saying that scientism is basically the view that the only way to get knowledge about the universe is via the scientific method, right?
Yes.
And what you're going to do now is you're going to demonstrate how actually the scientific method itself is built on presuppositions that we cannot study or observe.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay. Let's have a look.
So in a debate between William Lane Craig and Peter Atkins. So Peter Atkins is a brilliant, very distinguished chemist, I want to say, part of the University of Oxford. William Lane Craig is a philosopher, historian. He holds PhDs in both of those subjects. His Kalam cosmological argument is the most cited philosophical argument for God, I think, of all time. So you got two great minds in a debate together. It's brilliant. Peter Atkins says that science can account for everything. So he's one of the new atheists that likes to hold to scientism. I don't need religion because science can account for all knowledge. Anything that's worth knowing is known scientifically. And William Lane Craig says, well, there are a number of things that the scientific method can't prove. You don't know by the scientific method that logical and mathematical truths exist. So the law of non-contradiction isn't something that can be found through observation or empiricism. It must be assumed for the scientific method to make any sense.
What is the law of non-contradiction?
That something can't be A and non-A like at the same time and in the same way. So something this can't be a phone and a non-phone at the same time.
And we can't prove that by observation, right?
No, that's just something that exists for our observations to make any sense. So there's no scientific proof that there's no such thing as a married bachelor. That's not something scientific. That's logical.
Okay, fine.
So metaphysical truths like minds or external reality. So the fact that Abraham's mind actually exists and he's a conscious being isn't something that we have any scientific evidence for. I just have to assume that he's conscious in the same way that I am. It's just common sense.
Yeah.
It's same with external reality. I can't prove that external reality exists. Everything would be incomprehensible if it didn't. So it's just a common sense assumption that we hold to. Philosophers sometimes call them basic proper beliefs that you don't have justification for, but they're sort of the fact that they seem self-evident is their own justification.
Okay.
Ethical, moral beliefs. There's no scientific discovery that gives you moral beliefs about the universe. You don't cut open a human body and find that murdering it is wrong. You don't find that in a test tube or a microscope or a telescope. That's just something that's immaterial. Aesthetic judgments. Science can't tell you what's beautiful and ugly. And the big one, the Achilles heel of scientism, is that science cannot account for the veracity of science itself.
How come? Why not?
There's a number of reasons. So the scientific method is based on a number of unprovable assumptions about the physical world that lie at the foundation of what you do as a scientist. So if you need to use unprovable assumptions and things that you can't study in the scientific method, then saying that the scientific method is the only way to get knowledge would render the scientific method incomprehensible. So let me read a quote there. The presuppositions of science cannot be proved or disproved by the ordinary means of marshalling evidence, because any appeal to evidence has already implicated these presuppositions. This guy, Hugh, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Gotch, is it? He's another philosopher of science that's done a lot of work on this. So he gives a really good example of, if you flip a coin, you can say, the coin is flipped, it's tails, therefore the coin landed on tails. Or you would say, I see that the coin landed on tails instead of heads, therefore the coin landed on tails. But that isn't actually a valid logical argument, because you need to get from proposition to promise, from premise to premise. So you would have to say, we see that the coin landed on tails. Seeing implies that it landed in that way, therefore the coin landed on tails. So you have the evidence of the scientific method, the fact that when you flip the coin, you saw that it landed on tails. You then make a presupposition that your sensory perception is reliable, that it actually has landed on tails, that that's something that's actually happened. And then you also use immaterial rules of deduction in logic to get from you seeing it landing, the reliability of your sensory perceptions, to therefore the coin actually landed on tails. So in that sort of very basic example, you've got the evidence, and then you've got two presuppositions that the scientific method can't account for, that you need to use to be able to do the scientific method. So if scientism was true and all human knowledge was scientific knowledge, then you would not be able to do the scientific method.
Because you wouldn't be able to trust your own human intuitions. Right?
Yeah. So sensory perception being reliable.
Yeah.
It isn't that isn't a scientific conclusion.
Yeah.
That
you would say, scientifically you would say that human beings are not rational, or like that we don't know. That's just something that we don't know because we can't observe it in a test tube.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Whereas if there were other ways of getting knowledge, maybe by a basic proper belief, then you can know that sensory perceptions are reliable. You can know that sensory perceptions are reliable if you have something like a Christian worldview, where you have a revelation that makes people in the image of God, etc. But we'll get to that later. There are countless different worldviews other than scientism, which would give you reliability of sensory perceptions. And those do a better job of accounting for the scientific method than scientism does.
Mm. Okay, cool.
Should we move on?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of the foundation laid, that when Richard Dawkins is talking about the scientific method, he's often saying that Christianity is opposed to scientism, which is fine, brilliant. I don't like scientism. I believe that human beings are valuable. I don't find that in a test tube. I believe in universal objective morality. I don't find that in a test tube. I believe in a lot of things that the scientific method can't account for. That does not make me less inclined to the scientific method. That just means I use it in its proper limits. So having established that, it's now important that we look at the history of how the scientific method came to be. because the new atheist would claim that Christianity was always a barrier to scientific development. Whereas the scholarly consensus on this actually reflects a different story. So you have something in the scholarship. It's called the conflict thesis. So the conflict thesis is what the new atheists held to, is that Christianity and science are opposed to each other. And that comes out of the 19th century. So you have these two guys, William Draper and Andrew Dixon White. So they wrote these little pamphlets on the conflict thesis, and they took historic stories and they sort of mythologized to paint religion in a bad light. So they're the ones that spread all of these beliefs about scientists being tortured by the church. They spread the myths that the medieval people believed that the earth was flat. They spread all of these kinds of beliefs to say Christianity is opposed to the scientific method. We're the enlightened ones, we're the Enlightenment, coming to cast shade or throw shade on the Dark Ages who came before us. The Dark Ages were dark. We're the light ones. And they went through great efforts to convince everyone that they're the light ones and the Dark Ages were dark in the medieval period. And it's a compelling story. It's a compelling story that the institutions came and put shackles on the scientific method. The only trouble is, it's a myth. It is a myth, and it has captured way too many people's imaginations. So the author, Tim O'Neill, of the blog History for Atheists, he says the only problem with the conflict thesis is that it's wrong, and that actual historians of science have rejected it for 100 years. So actual historians of science aren't buying these arguments that in history, Christianity and the scientific method have been diametrically opposed. What most historians hold to is actually a complexity thesis. So instead of conflict, that they've always been at conflict, they would say that they've got a complex relationship. So Christians haven't always been perfect. Christian institutions haven't always done the right thing, but there's also many ways in which there's positive impact on the development of the scientific method, and there's also other cultures that have contributed to it. Technological developments in China, mathematics in the Islamic world. So there's a complex picture here. It's not just simple religion bad, science good. The scholars talk about the complexity thesis. So yeah, I've got a few more quotes to illustrate this. So you will hear over and over again that the Roman Catholic Church were terrible in persecuting and killing and torturing scientists. This study that was done in 1999 showed that the Roman Catholic Church gave more financial aid and social support to the study of astronomy over 6 centuries, from the recovery of ancient learning during the late Middle Ages into the Enlightenment, than any other and probably all other institutions. Bearing in mind, when we're doing this, we're not quoting from Christian sources. These aren't evangelical Christians. This isn't a Catholic apologist. This is just what secular historians, this is the consensus on the topic, is that the Christian worldview has in many ways given rise to the scientific method. This is another quote. For generations of historians and sociologists have discovered many ways in which Christian beliefs and Christian institutions played crucial roles in fashioning the tenets, methods, and institutions of what became modern science. Today, almost all historians agree that Christianity, Catholicism, as well as Protestantism, moved many early modern intellectuals to study nature systematically. So it's frustrating here that the new atheists will go on and on about how they're men of evidence, and they even hold to the scientism view because they want to prove to everyone that they only care about evidence and nothing else. Yet they stand themselves in opposition to scholarly consensus. And it disappoints me because Richard Dawkins is obviously a brilliant biologist and has made brilliant contributions to his field. That's what he was principally renowned for, was being a good scientist. It wasn't for being a historian. So for him to step into another discipline, he should be more aware of what the historians are saying before parading these ideas around. I don't have the training in historical studies either, which is why I want to say, well, here's what the consensus is of historians. Historians aren't saying the conflict thesis. Historians actually know where the conflict thesis came from, and they know that it came from two 19th century apologists for secularism and the Enlightenment. So yeah, conflict thesis bad. L's in the chat for the conflict thesis. Do you have any questions or thoughts on that?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, we can keep moving if so. Let us know in the chat if you've got any questions as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, is everyone enjoying the game? Everyone comment down below if you're still here. We've got 6 people in the chat. Come on, guys.
So this then poses the question, doesn't it? If the scientific method has not been opposed to Christianity, and there's not... I was in the chat for the conflict thesis and for France.
Here we go. This is a good question by Omar.
Yeah.
Ibn al-Haytham, the famous Iraqi eye doctor.
Yeah, I mean, we can we're going to cover this later. So it's really peculiar that the Islamic world was more developed in terms of mathematics. They were more advanced in the medieval period than Europe were. It was the same with the Chinese cultures, and they were more advanced technologically. But a question that arises, it's called the Needham question in the scholarship. A question that historians are trying to ask is, why does the scientific revolution... So when I talk about the scientific revolution, I'm talking specifically about the definition I gave at the beginning, that systematic observational studies that then create universal or theoretical explanations. Why does that come out of the West and not in these more advanced Chinese and Islamic cultures? Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go into that question later. I haven't landed anywhere on what it was in the Christian West that gave rise to the scientific method. There's a few options to go for. But yeah, I feel like we'll cover that when we get there.
What about the next question? It's never been religion versus science.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It never has been. That was an Enlightenment lie.
How would you correct that?
By what I've said. So the conflict thesis is it isn't historically accurate. There isn't a scientist that holds that today.
Okay. Cool.
So yeah, it's completely right. In fact, what I'm going to argue is that, especially in the Christian West, there were Christian beliefs that gave rise to the scientific method.
You say Christian beliefs?
Yes.
What about Islamic beliefs, for example?
What about them? What do you mean?
Like, what do you think it's distinctly Christian beliefs, or are they also Islamic beliefs, for example?
So this is why there's a complexity thesis in the scholarship, is that there are contributions made to mathematics in Islamic cultures. Chinese cultures made advancements in technology. But there are peculiar Christian views that gives rise to the scientific method as we have it today, as the definition I gave at the start.
Okay.
And we'll get there. We will get there. So let's keep plowing on. So this next section, I'm going to chart a very brief sort of explanation of some of the core tenets of the scientific method. This is where I'm going beyond my expertise, so to speak. So as soon as it gets to the nitty-gritty of actual like scientific models of different things, that's when I become less interested. I'm not a scientist. I like history, but some of these theories are important. So I'm going to be leaning a lot on the sociologist Rodney Stark, who was the professor of sociology at Baylor University. Not a Christian himself, but wrote a lot about Christian history and its interaction with different things in modern culture. So he points out that the Greeks were not proponents of the scientific method. They did come up with universal theories to explain reality, but they often lacked proper observations. So you'll probably know the famous story of Aristotle teaching that objects fall with proportion to their weight. If he'd actually done any observations, he would have known that wasn't true. But Aristotle had this had a different worldview to what we have now. He was more focused. He thought he could sit back in an armchair and through reason alone come up with explanations of the world. So he thought that everything acted in the way that would reflect the essence of what it is. So if you could find out the essence of what something is, you know how it would behave. So if you know the essence of what fire is, then you know that fire will rise, for example, because you know the essence of it. So you don't need observations there. So there's a common belief that the Greeks started the scientific method, which isn't true. They had helpful sort of contributions to knowledge, but it wasn't the scientific method. Although the scientific method was absent in Greek and Eastern philosophers, it slowly evolved out of the Christian West. So there was no Dark Ages, there was no scientific revolution. Rather, the notion was invented to discredit the medieval church, as Rodney Stark says. So it wasn't the case that the scientific method was a revolution in the 16th or 15th or wherever you put it century. That didn't start the scientific method. It evolved slowly out of the Christian medieval West. So often Copernicus in the 15th century is attributed with the one that stepped or leaped out of darkness into light to create the Enlightenment. And he did so by placing the sun in the center of the universe. And that was perceived as revolutionary because it was revolutionary because he wanted the universe to cohere to observations rather than immaterial ideals. So I said Aristotle wanted to know what's the immaterial ideal that all physical processes are reflecting. Copernicus said, scrap that. What happened? What does it look like? Right? So that's a fundamental change in the way that we look at the world. We're no longer sat in an armchair going, oh, I wonder what it is about fire that makes it do this. Copernicus wants to look at fire, study it, which is when you'd realize that it isn't the fireness that makes fire rise, it's heat, right? And you know that through observation rather than, what's the word? Just through thinking about the essence of what it is. So yeah, what Copernicus added was not a leap, but the implicit next step in a long line of discoveries and innovations that stretch back for centuries. So in other words, he sat on the shoulders of Christian thinkers that came before him. So the Greek philosophers believed that the planets were in a state of constant movement. So to explain how planets overcame friction, they turned the moon, stars, and other planets into like living creatures that were almost pushed by the gods. So that was how they got around all of the planets and everything always being in movement. William of Ockham came along in the 14th century. He predicted something akin to Newton's first law of motion. So he concluded that space exists in a frictionless vacuum so that the movement could be continuous. All you would need was a prime or first mover to get everything in motion. And because of the frictionlessness of the universe and Newton's first law, it would continue. Later on, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this name, but a French scientist in the 14th century claimed that all of the planets are circling the Earth. He claimed that that is an illusion, which of course you would think of if you were sat on the Earth. You would think that everything's revolving around you. And then Nicholas of Cusa built on that study by studying the eclipse and using observations, and he perceived that from the Earth there will always be one motionless center where all other things will be in motion. So Copernicus was building on these theories. This is why it wasn't a leap out of darkness into the light. There were Christian medieval scholastics in Christian universities all thinking about these different things, making observations, challenging each other, until finally you get Copernicus, who comes up with the sort of the theory that ties it all together. It's not really a leap. It's not really a revolution. It's more continuous steps of evolution. So that's my basic explanation of heliocentrism and how it came to be. So Richard Dawkins and co would say that guys like Copernicus, Galileo, like they were martyrs, they were freedom fighters, and they took the leap out of the darkness into the light, rather than seeing them as the product of Christian scholastics in Christian universities. All of these guys were clergy, like literally clergymen that are on the side studying the universe. At this point of time, you start to get this view develop, which was quite pivotal in the Reformation, that callings were not just for ministers. So the term vocatio is Latin for calling, which is where we get the term vocation from. During this time period, you started to get the idea that vocations weren't just clergy. It was also doing stuff like studying the universe, being a scientist, being a mathematician. That was your calling. So there's a number of factors that give rise to this, but they're Christian ideas, they're Christian factors that lead to heliocentrism.
Can you just give like a 10-second overview of what heliocentrism is? What is the definition of that?
I think the definition is that the Earth isn't the center of the universe.
Okay. So basically, just to I'm going to try and conceptualize what you said. Because, by the way, guys, this is the first time, this is basically the first time I've heard this in this amount of detail. But so what you're saying is that Copernicus and people like Galileo basically in Richard Dawkins and the New Atheists, they were the first guys to be hold on a minute, we actually need to get things, we need to actually observe things to be able to say things about the universe. We can't just sit in a rocking chair and be oh, you know what? I think fire rises because fire is fire and it rises. We actually have to look at why and observe it.
So, and the other thing they do was they'd interpret the lack of the scientific method not to the Greco-Roman worldviews, but to the Christian worldview. So my argument is that it was Aristotle that held back the development of the scientific method. The medieval church spent way too long reading Aristotle and not enough time reading the Bible. And that's where some of the things that inhibit the scientific method came to be. Richard Dawkins would say, actually, they should have been reading the Greeks. They shouldn't have been reading the Bible, and that was the problem.
Okay, cool. And so basically you're saying that Copernicus, Galileo were leaning on Christian ideas that already existed, and they were using those to basically get what they did. Basically, yeah. we need to do this. We need to look at what happened. We need to look at what happens to fire, and they get that from Christian ideas. Can you go into those Christian ideas? I'd be interested to see.
They're going to come later.
Okay.
So we can get. I reckon we'll get there when we get there, because I think the main rebuttal to this would. Sorry, there's a typo at the top. The main rebuttal to this will be Galileo. I often call him the conflict thesis flex tape. Because you know that geezer that in the ads that puts the flex tape on literally anything and it patches up the cracks. So the conflict thesis has a lot of cracks. It doesn't seem to line up with most of our understanding of the history of science. Apart from one man, there's one piece of flex tape that can cover up those cracks, and it's, what about Galileo? Wasn't he tortured and persecuted and put in prison for his belief in the scientific method? And it's like, well, no. Going back to the Draper-White hypothesis, they were the ones that reread the Galileo story and made him. They made him the victim in such a way that he was tortured and all of this stuff, which is just historically not accurate. And he wasn't treated particularly well. He did get put in house arrest, but his house arrest was in a villa. Let's be frank, guys. His house arrest was in a villa. He wasn't ever tortured, nothing like that. And I've got a few ways of summarizing, because so Richard Dawkins would say that it's a tale of conflict, a tale of two opposing views, science and Christianity. But the Galileo trial shows us that it's a lot more than that. So a tale of two egos took place. It's really interesting that him and the Pope had some disagreements, and the Pope told him to caveat some of his writings and he gave him basically like something to put in the forward as a caveat to some of his scientific work. Galileo, as well as the Pope at the time, they both had big egos, and they both wanted to be the guys in charge. So Galileo published his findings in sort of an allegory type thing, and he had some dialogue between some characters, and one of the characters was called the Simpleton. And he puts the words of Pope Leo into the mouth of the simpleton. Now, if your heliocentrism isn't going to get you thrown in prison, probably calling the Pope a simpleton might do the job, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind, that they had a personality clash, which helped create some conflict between the two. The other one was, it was a tale of two worldviews. So the Catholic Church had assumed the Aristotelian model, and those became like, so Vishal Mangwadi puts it, they became the a priori assumptions of future generations. And these assumptions chained the European mind. Europe could not develop the scientific method until these claims were broken by the biblical worldview. Now, you could say that Galileo's conflict was Galileo against the church. More accurately, it was probably Galileo against Aristotle. the church's problem with some of his conclusions was that it undermined things that Aristotle had taught. So that was another reason. The next is there was a tale of two fractions, or a tale of two churches. We've got to remember this is a time period that was just after the Protestant Reformation began. The Council of Trent had just said that all interpretations of the Bible have to come from unanimous church father agreement. And Galileo, as well as publishing science, also published private interpretations of scripture, which the Council of Trent, in my understanding, seems to have prohibited. So they were really careful, and particularly the tensions were heightened when you've just had this big like schism in the church. It makes complete sense that the Pope would be very, very cautious of someone coming and having personal interpretations of the Bible in that context. Now, this is if I put my Protestant apologetics hat on, this is the kind of thing that Protestantism thrives in, because the church fathers might not have commented, or they might have commented naively on whether the earth was the center of the universe. Galileo did not believe that the passage of scripture that seemed to talk about this sort of thing actually taught anything like that, as is sort of the consensus today. But it was helpful that in light of his scientific discoveries that he could also spend time thinking as a theologian, which is what scientists were. A lot of scientists in this day were both theologians and scientists. Protestantism allows for that, which is interesting, just to get my Protestant apologetics hat on, which I won't put on much in this channel. So in summary, Vishal Magwadi, the Indian philosopher, puts it this way: the church did not execute scientists for their science. The conflicts were theological, moral, social, personal, political, or administrative. So the flex tape isn't flex tape. It's just like knacks, like sellotape.
Tissue paper.
Yeah, tissue paper that dissolves. It doesn't work. This conflict thesis still does not work, even though Galileo was treated badly by the Pope.
So just to summarize that, so you've got this conflict thesis, right? Which is the idea that like God and science can't coexist, right? And that conflict thesis is built upon people like Galileo, people like what's that other geezer's name? What's his name?
Copernicus,
people like that, who like were allegedly persecuted by the church for believing in the scientific method.
Yeah, and that method, that myth was invented in the 19th century by White and Draper, I think his name was. So those were two like anti-religious apologists that invented that thesis, and it sort of took hold in popular culture.
Okay, so basically, this whole idea that they were persecuted is a myth, because that top quote there, actually, there were lots of different things involved. It wasn't just because of their science. It was moral, social, personal, administrative, political, whatever. So actually, they're blurring the story a bit.
And just to sort of reiterate here, these aren't Christian. We're not picking evangelical Christians that believe that there wasn't a conflict between science and religion. This is consensus in scholarship at the minute. All historians agree with this. Okay.
So every single quote that we're using is a non-Christian secular.
Not everyone. I mean, Vishal Magwadi is a Christian, but
okay.
So I've quoted from him and
Rodney Stark.
Rodney Stark isn't a Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah. So apart from William Lane Craig at the start, And Fisher Magwadi here is saying nothing that isn't said in books like Galileo Goes to Jail and other myths about the relation between Christianity and science.
Okay.
Which is a good book that I'd recommend. Not Christian, just sociologists and historians talking about myths that the new atheists, or not even the new atheists, just the enlightened ones from the Enlightenment came up with.
Okay, cold. Should we keep going?
Yeah. Ooh, okay. So, I was reading a lecture by Oppenheimer one time, and I was absolutely struck. I was absolutely struck by some of the things he had to say. So, in this essay, Science and Culture, I think it was titled, he was scratching his head with the idea that we've spoken about before, that the Greco-Roman worldview didn't give rise to the scientific method. Neither did the Chinese civilizations that were more advanced. Neither did the Islamic ones that were really advanced in medicine and mathematics. Why did the Christian worldview come from the West? And he comes to the conclusion that one came to have a rapid, progressive, cumulative, and accelerating growth of science in Western Europe with the Reformation and the rediscovery of antiquity, precisely because in this land, the ancient ideas of progress, which you find in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, even more than the New, came to hold. So he's saying that there's a strong link between the development of the scientific method and the discovery or the rediscovery of ancient truths found in the Old and New Testament. He was a secular Jew himself, not a Christian again. He just sees that the worldview, the ideas that you find in the Old Testament seem to have given rise to the scientific method. So I think it would be useful to go through some of these. So belief number one, God created a world that is orderly and comprehensible. So here's a quote, monotheism gave rise to one of the cornerstones of modern science, the belief that an experiment conducted on a Monday will give the same results that you're able to use on a Tuesday, since the same God is in charge of the universe. So a really important principle to the scientific method is the principle of uniformity. So if I keep the conditions the same thing will happen. So if I drop my mouse, if I drop it, now it will, and I keep the conditions the same, in 5 minutes, it will drop as well. So that seems to lend itself to a Christian idea of the world, where the world is created orderly and it's being upheld. This is something that both Bertrand Russell and David Hume talked about quite a lot. They talk about something called the problem of induction. So they were wrestling with the idea of induction being the cornerstone of the scientific method. But how do we know that induction is reliable? Well, surely we know that the universe is uniform because the future will resemble the past. And how do we know this? Well, the future always has resembled the past. So I could drop my mouse 5 times in a row and the same thing will happen. So I say, great, the future will resemble the past because because the future has resembled the past. But then they said, hang on a second, I can't say that without assuming that the future will resemble the past, which is the very thing that I'm trying to investigate. So both David Hume and Bertrand Russell just sort of gave up with answering the problem of induction, and there's still not been an answer to it today. An answer that would make sense is to have a monotheistic God. If you have a monotheistic, unchanging God, then it makes sense that the universe would be upheld consistently and orderly.
Why monotheistic?
Because if you have loads of different gods that are all like fighting with each other, what god's going to be strongest on a Monday? Which is going to be strongest on the Tuesday? Who's going to be in charge?
Oh, I see. Okay. So
you don't have consistency.
Okay. Sure.
So yeah, the great contribution of Christianity to the development of the scientific method was that there's reason to nature to discover by the exercise of reason in man. So it's created orderly and it's comprehensible because it's not just random chance.
Okay.
Here's one. Well, if the polytheistic gods kept to their roles, there would be consistency. I don't know any polytheistic worldview that would view gods in that way. But the Greco-Romans definitely didn't. And so Christianity came in that context where the Greco-Romans had gods that weren't powerful enough to have like sovereignty over nature. They weren't consistent. They had human-like emotions. You don't have a consistent universe in that polytheistic worldview. Whereas monotheism, you have one unchanging God that governs things. That gives rise to, that's one of the facets that would give rise to the scientific method. So in Hinduism, each god has a role. I'm not sure if Hindus would believe that the universe is uniform in the way that monotheism gives rise to.
Quickly on that, I'm pretty sure Hinduism is very sort of different in that, like, there's no sort of like uniform way of saying, like, well, Hinduism's very like fluid, it's very flexible. It's not sort of like, it's not a religion, if that makes sense. It's not sort of in the same way that Christianity
is. It's not one religion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's many different ones. So I do feel like that's it wouldn't quite work.
So some more on this. So this is another development of William of Ockham in the 14th century. So he taught something called voluntarism, and that was the view that God created the world through his divine will, and he could have created it in all kinds of different ways. So he could have created a universe where gravity has different properties. Now, that's different to how Aristotle would look at the world. Aristotle would look at the world and he would see the world as everything reflects some kind of necessary truth that sits behind it. So fire behaves the way it does because it reflects fireness, right? What a thing does is by virtue of what a thing is. So in that way, Aristotle believed that everything had a necessary truth behind it. So then that's why Aristotle could sit back in his chair and he could think about the universe and he could work out what things are. And by virtue of what they are, he could work out what they would do. William of Ockham would argue that actually, because God created the universe, and he could have created it in a different way, he could have created it at a different time. The universe in that way is contingent, that it could have a different possibility to it. So then, if there's lots of different possibilities that the universe could be, the only way to find out is by studying it. So I'll read from the quote here. Peter Harrison wrote quite a lot on this. The fact that the laws of nature were determined by free divine choice, with no traces of necessity, as Newton put it, meant that the order of nature could not be rationally intuited, but would need to be established by empirical investigation. Since there are countless different configurations which God could have instituted here, experience alone must teach us what configurations he actually selected in preference to the rest. So because there's a number of different possible universes that God could have created, we just have to study the one that we're in to work out what it looks like. We can't just think, what is God like, and from that deduce what the universe would be like. Because God being good doesn't necessitate that he creates a world with certain laws of gravity. He could have created a world with different laws of gravity, for example. So the only way to know is to study it. Do you have any questions on that?
Yeah. So you're basically saying, right, that like God created. Well, hold on. So you're basically saying, so this is sort of like the solution, as it were, to the problem of induction. In that the problem of induction.
Sorry.
No, I'm careful with my terminology, but let me explain.
Okay.
So you're basically saying that scientists have struggled and wrestled with the problem of induction.
Yeah.
And they haven't really found a conclusion to it. However, the Christian worldview seems to provide an explanation of the problem of induction, because you have an orderly universe created by God. Now, what I don't understand is when you go into all of this, like Aristotelian versus William of Ockham sort of understanding of it.
So there's two separate points.
Okay.
So the first one is that atheists have a problem with induction that Christians don't have. The reason why the scientific method developed, or you could put it this way, the reason why atheists have a problem of induction is because they already have been influenced by Christianity to not have a problem with induction. So the fact that they do the scientific method is an impact of Christian ideas, that there's a monotheistic God who created the world orderly. So they've inherited that worldview, and in their own worldview, they can't make sense of it.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so that's the problem of induction. The universe is uniform because God created it. The second point is not just that God created the world that is orderly, but God created the world that is contingent. And
what is
one
contingent?
Of the factors.
What does contingent mean? I know what it means, but just explain to those that are watching. What does contingent mean?
So contingent means that it doesn't have to exist. So the fact that England beat Mexico at the Azteca is a contingent fact. You could feasibly have a universe where Dan Burn wasn't brought on in the 75th minute, and we conceded from a header, and then we lost in extra time. That could have happened. So that would be, these are all contingent truths where there could be another possibility. Things like the law of logic, there aren't any possible universes where the laws of logic don't exist, because they're just universal.
Why is that?
Well, they have no start, they have no end. There's no time period, there's no place where they don't exist.
Okay, so the laws of logic are not contingent.
Yeah, they're necessary.
They are necessary. Okay.
So Aristotle believed that all things boil down to their necessary essence.
Okay.
So the physical fire behaves the way it does because of the essence of what a fire is.
Okay.
So if I sit back in my chair and think about what a fire is, I could deduce logically how the fire would behave.
Yeah.
Whereas William of Ockham would say, no, that's not true. Fire is contingent because it's created. There is a possible universe where God didn't create fire. God has the free divine will and choice not to create fire, so it could not exist. So there's no universal, unchanging fireness that I need to be thinking about. I just need to go and look at it.
Okay.
And that's really important for the development of the scientific method, because you have more than just mere rationality. You then have observation.
Because of contingency.
Yeah, because William of Ockham emphasized the contingency of creation.
Yeah, cold.
Yeah, so another quote from Peter Harrison. A freely created world cannot necessarily be reconstructed from abstract reasoning. Its actual character must be investigated.
Yeah.
There was something else I was going to say about William of Ockham. Yes, Occam's razor, which is what he's famous for. This all ties into it because Occam's razor is all about not multiplying explanations. So if fire rises, Aristotle would break Occam's razor and he'd sit back in his chair and go, interesting, fire's rising. That's probably because of this essence. And there's probably because fire has always existed in the ideal form, the essence of it. And from that, I can think more about what a fire ought to be like. Occam's razor is like, no, fire rises because of the heat. The simplest explanation is the best. That's what Occam's razor is all about. You don't multiply explanations. You just go for the simplest one because it's most likely to be correct.
Okay. Interesting.
So yeah, William of Ockham, researching for this live, I did not realize how influential his views were on the development of the scientific method. So there you go. Have a look at William of Ockham. Great theologian, philosopher, mathematician, scientist, everything, because people did loads of stuff back then. Probably because they weren't watching TikTok.
Where's the guy?
So belief number 2. 2-0 Spain. What on earth? We're gonna be playing Spain in the final. What on earth?
Well, that's if we beat Argentina.
Yeah, come on, lad, come on.
I don't know, geezer.
I think we'll walk it. So we're made in the image of God with rational minds and reliable sensory perceptions. So another tenet which gives rise to the scientific method is the peculiarly Christian belief that people are made in God's image. And what this means is that God creates some of his attributes to us so that both the world, the universe, and God is knowable to us. We have reliable sensory perceptions, which means we can know God and we can know the universe. So here's a quote. If we are creatures made in the divine image, then it is entirely understandable that there is an order in the universe that is deeply accessible to our minds. So there are worldviews that don't have like external reality existing, that don't put a very high sort of reliability on sensory perceptions, on thinking, that don't have cognitive faculties that are reliable. In Christianity, you're made in the image of God, so you have reliable sensory perceptions. So here's another quote from Toby Huff. So Toby Huff wrote a really interesting book, which is trying to answer Needham's question. And if you weren't here earlier, Needham's question is, why did the scientific method arise in the Christian West and not in more advanced cultures, like the Chinese cultures that had more advanced technology, or the Islamic Arabic cultures that had more advanced mathematics? Why did the Christian West come up with the scientific method? One of the answers he gives is the close connection between God's created world and the structure of God's mind and his created universe. Consequently, there was a connection between the human mind created by God and the structure of God's mind, so that human beings can have the capacity to grasp the very nature of God's existence and his laws. This medieval Christian belief has no analog in Islamic or Chinese philosophical thought. So this is a distinctly Christian idea. Do you have any questions on that?
I mean, could you just clarify then? So this specific point that we're made, well, I guess the bit that this ties into is that we, in order to do the scientific method, we need to trust our rational minds to actually understand things about the universe. right?
Yeah.
And Christianity provides an explanation for that, because it says that we're created in the image of God, meaning we have rational minds in order to understand things about the universe, which was made by God as well, right?
Yeah.
But religions like Islam doesn't. That doesn't provide an explanation in the same way. Could you talk more about that?
As Toby Huff says, and other sociologists that have studied this, that the belief that man is made in the image of God is a peculiarly Christian idea.
Okay.
I don't know a huge amount about Chinese beliefs or Islamic beliefs, but this is what the sociologists and the historians are telling me.
To my knowledge, in Islam, we're not made in the image of God. However, I have met Muslims that will hold to that view. Omar, it will be interesting if you're listening. Do you hold to the view that humans are made in the image of God? Or I guess my terminology is Christian. In the image of God is a Christian terminology. What do Muslims believe about how humans are made?
That would be it's useful. Also worth clarifying here. So Toby Huff, for example, he isn't like a theologian. He's not studying the doctrines of the different religions. He's a sociologist, the political philosophical thought. So he's saying in philosophical thought, in medieval scholastics, both in Islam, China, the West, and Christianity, the Christians were writing about the connection between the universe being made by God's mind and us being made in God's image, and how that means we can study it. And then, so that's what Christians were writing about in the medieval period. So we've got a question here. Why wouldn't other cultures be able to develop the scientific method if everyone, including those other religions, were made in God's image and have the same reasoning as Christians? Yeah, good question. So being made in God's image, they did make very good contributions to the development of the scientific method. I've mentioned, we get the term algebra. That's an Arabic term. Mathematics developed a lot in the Islamic world. I think the concept of zero came out of Arabia as well.
It did.
So you have these Islamic developments in mathematics, you have Chinese developments in technology. I think things like the printing press came out of China, all kinds of different stuff like that. But they didn't believe that they were made in the image of God. So they didn't, or it was the Christians in the West that believed they were made in the image of God, which spurred them on to study the universe, because they said, my mind is reliable. So when I'm observing things, and observations is key to the scientific method, they could trust their minds. Go for it.
I was just going to say, so everyone is made in the image of God. Everyone is able to do science. But this is basically going against Richard Dawkins' view that Christianity and science are mutually exclusive, right? Because actually, the whole premise of the scientific method leans on humans being made in the image of God and understanding and actually having a rational mind in order to understand the universe around us. If that wasn't true, if we didn't have a rational mind that was able to understand the universe around us, then we wouldn't be able to trust our intuitions about our observations.
So the next question, the claim Islam gave rise to science. Many Muslim apologists argue that science itself created the scientific revolution and that the Quran inspired scientific inquiry. It's interesting. Like I said, sort of towards the beginning, I haven't landed on the answer to Needham's question. Why does the scientific method come out of the West and not Islamic and other cultures? I think what we need to clarify is what we mean by the scientific method, because sometimes these apologists will be talking about medicine. So Omar helpfully quoted the Iraqi
Ibn al-Haytham.
Yes, thank you. So he made loads of developments in medicine, for example, which was true in the early Islamic empire. They did helpful things like preserve Greek texts like Aristotle. They did really helpful stuff in mathematics. None of this is the scientific method. So at the start of the video, I gave the definition: systematic study, building on previous knowledge through observations to give you a codified theoretical explanation of how the universe is. That is something that is peculiarly like coming out of the scientific revolution in the West. And that's why sociologists and historians ask Needham's question of why that is the case, because these other cultures were more reliable or more advanced. So we can give credit where credit's due to developments that were made in the Islamic world. But also we have to hold on to the fact that the Christian revolution, the scientific revolution did happen in the West. That is a fact of history as well.
Yeah.
There's loads
a lot of questions.
So yeah, I'd agree with you here, Omar. I'm aware of the hadith as well. I think it's in Sahih al-Bukhari as well. It talks about Adam being made in the image of God. But when we're talking here, we're quoting from historians and sociologists. So if that idea hadn't captured the imagination of people to mean that they would then go in and study the universe systematically, etc., and through observations, then it isn't picked up in this kind of research, right? So I think there is a distinction there between Christians believing that we're made in the image of God is a foundational doctrinal belief that is influencing how we live. Whereas it seems that there is some kind of reference in one hadith which seems vague, and you're saying it's kind of a middle ground, maybe. I think that's different. There's so many questions. The early Islamic empire inherited the intellectual wealth of older civilizations. When the Arabic Muslim armies conquered the Byzantine and Sasanian empires in the 7th century, they acquired regions that already had centuries old traditions of learning, Greek philosophy and science. But so we're talking about the scientific method. So the Greeks did not have the scientific method. They had technology, they studied things, they had good thinking, they had all kinds of stuff, but they didn't have the scientific method. Mathematics is not the scientific method. Building bridges isn't the scientific method. We're talking about something more narrow, which came out of the Christian West.
Can you go back a few slides to just show everyone, maybe for the new viewers that maybe weren't here before? Yeah, that's it.
So yeah, I gave these definitions at the start. So science is all about building on previous knowledge to give through observations and through tests and in strict conditions that gives you a systematic way or theoretical explanation of understanding how things work. So building a bridge may be scientific in a sense, but it isn't the scientific method, in the same way that algebra is really important to the scientific method, but it isn't the scientific method.
Yeah.
So Omar says, as a Muslim, I wouldn't give sole credit to Islam or Christianity for science. I see it gradually built up through time and across cultures. So yes, to an extent, I agree here. So historians hold to the complexity thesis, which I said at the start. So it isn't that Christianity and science have been in conflict. It's that there's a complex relationship between them. And one of the things that's complex is that there's sharing of ideas across cultures. Like Christian theologians learn a lot from Islamic theologians about stuff like divine simplicity, for example, or the Kalam cosmological argument. Algebra, the concept of zero. So there are things that the Christian West drew from the Islamic world, but there is a peculiar scientific revolution that took place in the West. And I think it's a really sensible historic question. Again, it's the Needham question in the literature of why that came in the Christian West and not the Chinese and Islamic worlds. Or Islamic
especially given that
races.
they were so far advanced.
Yes.
Ahead of the Christian West at the time, or previously.
It is a shame I can't post the entire comment debunking Islamic contribution to science. I'm not sure what you're saying there, but let's move on. So we talk about being made in the image of God. The next one, original sin. So one of the things that gave rise to the scientific method in the West is that our cognitive faculties, yes, are reliable because we're made in God's image. That is true, but on the other side of the coin, we are also sinful and have deceptive and deceiving hearts. So there's a tension there where we can think rationally, but we also choose not to. So theologians talk about the noetic effects of sin. And that's basically that sin has an impact on cognitive faculties on the brain. That's something that Augustine believed in, but Thomas Aquinas didn't in the medieval period. And so for that reason, you have more of the Aristotelian way of thinking. I can sit in an armchair, and because my rational faculties are good enough, I can deduce everything about the universe that can be known. Whereas the Augustinian idea of original sin became more prominent in the church later on with Reformation, etc. And that gave rise to the belief that our cognitive faculties alone aren't good enough to tell us everything about the universe, because we deceive ourselves and we deceive others. We suppress the truth with a lie. So we need testing. We need to make sure we're not mistaken by doing it in loads of different circumstances. We need it to be peer reviewed. So all of this comes out of the view that, yes, we're made in God's image, but we also have original sin. So here's a quote, Peter Harrison again. Experimental natural philosophy was a means of imposing discipline on both an errant natural world and on a fallen human mind. So it's interesting. I think this is another Christian distinctive. So being made in the image of God is distinctive. Same with original sin as a Christian distinctive. So this might give us some clues as to why the scientific method arose out of the West in the medieval Christian West rather than in these other cultures. Here's a quote from Galileo Goes to Jail and other myths about science and religion. Augustine's notion of original sin, which held that Adam's fall left humans damaged, was embraced by advocates of experimental natural philosophy. As they saw it, fallen humans lacked grace to understand the workings of the world through cognition alone, requiring in their disgraced state painstaking experiment and observation. In this way, Christian doctrine led to the urgency of experiment. So as Omar says, original sin is properly unique. So this is a distinctive Christian contribution to the need for like strict observational testing, which is a key facet of the scientific method, which came in the Christian West and not in other more primitive forms of the scientific method that you find in other cultures. I've got one final. Do I have one? Yes, I have one final quote. The revival of Augustinian understandings of original sin and its effects also contributed to the new experimental approach. Here, the argument was that fallen human minds could not aspire to demonstrative knowledge of nature's operations. Aristotle had not been able to entertain his ambitious vision only because he was unacquainted with the idea of original sin. So we've spoken a lot about Aristotle. One of the key factors in the rise of the scientific method, I think, is the medieval church coming away from Aristotelian ways of thinking, which seems counterintuitive because the conflict thesis would say the Greeks were scientific, the Greeks were more scientific, the medieval church weren't. So then we go back to what the Greeks were when we free ourselves from religion. But actually, I think the shackles were held by Aristotle's influence on the church. The medieval church spent way too long trying to conform Christian ideas to Greco-Roman philosophies. And when they did that, when they got rid of Aristotle, or not got rid of, he's still the most sort of influential thinker of all time. But when we change some of these ideas, that's when the scientific method comes to fruition. Any questions or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So you're basically saying that another need for this scientific method is that humans are sinful. As Romans 1 says, we suppress the truth of a lie. And so because of that, we need to test, right? We need to test via observation and to see what actually happens when you put magnesium in water. I don't know.
Brilliant. So I started studying for this question, the Needham question. I didn't come to a solid answer. Here are some of the reasons given for why the Christian West came up with the scientific method and not the more advanced Islamic and Chinese cultures. So first, Christian theological concepts. We've seen a couple of them. Things like the contingency of creation, things like the orderliness of creation, things like being made in the image of God, things like original sin. All of these came together to be a springboard to motivate people to study the universe systematically. The medieval university system in the West, you had a place where lots of money was given to people to dedicate themselves to studying things. That was the kind of environment that allowed people to challenge ideas and allowed the flourishing of the scientific method. Toby Huff does draw some parallels with the what are the Islamic schools called, Abraham? Madrasas.
Madrasa.
Yeah, that madrasa. That's the one. There are some parallels there. This is an area for more research. I want to do a video on this at some point as well, which would be interesting. So point number 3 is really interesting, is that a lot of cultures have either had mathematical or experimental ideas of how to study. So the Chinese cultures had great technological advancements. They had loads of emphasis on the experimental, not so much on the mathematic. The Islamic world, they were all about the algebra and like all of this kind of mathematical thought. It was only in the medieval Christian West where the two were synthesized. That's interesting. I wonder what led to them being synthesized. You also have political plurality, which was important. So there wasn't the same divide in sort of the state institutions in other cultures as you had in the West. The university ran separately to the state. So scholars were more free thinking. And a lot of sociologists of science would argue that free thinking, freedom of speech are things that are very pivotal to the development of the scientific method. Now, that wasn't always done perfectly in the medieval West, as I'm sure you'll be aware, but the fact that people could study in universities and more often than not come to their own conclusions. And they could do so to critique the state. That was something that was unique in the Christian West, that allowed the scientific method to develop. So there are some thoughts. I'm going to work on a video on this because I haven't quite answered the question yet. But yeah, those are some initial thoughts on it. To be able to answer this, I feel like I need to spend more time in understanding the Islamic Golden Age, understanding Chinese thought, etc.
Bro will be a monster. What on earth? W's in the chat for Tom.
Yeah, so I mean, that comes to the end of the PowerPoint I made. I really enjoyed researching for this, actually. And it's built on previous stuff. So if you want to listen to just a 20-minute version of this, there is one on the channel. Cheers, Omar. So there is one on the channel if you want a 20-minute version. But yeah, stay tuned for this new video coming. I guess to be the good evangelical that my parents hope I'm not, I really should end with some sort of gospel proclamation. I guess we've heard that the underpinnings of the scientific method is all about who God is. So an important component is that God is monotheistic. He doesn't change. He's universally unchanging. You have that God of the necessary existence, the necessary being of God, who creates a contingent creation because he has the free will to do so. He has the divine will to create any kind of universe that he wanted. He decided to create one which has image bearers, people that can know him, that can know the universe. He, in his divine free will, created a contingent universe for us to study and explore and to come to know him and to come to enjoy him through the universe he created. He also is intimate in his upholding of the universe. We don't live in an arbitrary universe. We live in one that has meaning, that has purpose, that has stability because God creates it so. Yet we've decided to rebel against him. This is why we need to do observational tests in the scientific method. We need to test because we've rebelled against God. The source of stability in the universe, the source of order, we've brought disorder and chaos. In our contingency, in our finiteness, we've decided to go our own way. But that great God, the great monotheistic God who upholds creation, who brings order, has decided to step into the contingent world. He has crossed the barrier from necessary to contingent through the person of Jesus Christ so that we can come to know him. The greatest emphasis is put on sensory perceptions in the Christian faith because the New Testament is all about seeing God come to his people. It's all about seeing the Lord Jesus Christ. We've seen him, we've heard him, we've touched him. That is reliable. That is a reliable way of knowing information. The fact that they saw him dead and they saw him alive is a reliable way of gaining information about the world. So it isn't just that God gives us the foundation to do the scientific method. It's that story is the truth of a person who calls himself truth. Jesus calls himself truth and calls to you to be restored to the God of order who created all of this contingent things and upholds it, the necessary truth that apart from him, there is nothing but chaos. He says, come to me, all who are wearied and burdened, you will find rest. So I've done my duty as a good evangelical now.
What on earth? I wonder who that is.
Yeah, Prime Tom Woodage is unbelievable. What on earth?
Who's the guy?
I think there's a debate going on in the chat while I've been waffling on.
There's been a debate in the chat I've seen.
I support what the presenter of this program is saying. I don't support his team.
England.
But why? So he supports the presenter. It must be I don't support. He
No,
must be
he's
a hater. What?
He doesn't support England.
Oh, I don't support. I see what he's. I see. Okay, it doesn't matter if you support England or not. We're winning anyway.
Yeah, we actually are.
Oh, fascinating listening. Hey, you've been here for time. I can't lie. I saw that name pop up at the beginning.
Are you our number one? No, Omar. No one's dethroned Omar so far.
But it's based on number of comments, isn't it? Rather than isn't it based on that rather than listening time?
It might be.
Yeah. But still, W in the chat for Omar.
Allez les Bleus. They're losing. They're 2-0 down. Or is it 2-1 now? They're 2-0 down. Oh. And Mbappe got a yellow card. There's literally like 5 minutes left. That's it. France are out.
Were you watching the debate in the chat? I'm trying to like find out what was said.
A bit.
What can you summarize for me?
I think just like one of the viewers sort of like disagreed with what Omar was saying.
Okay.
And Omar was sort of just saying that like he's sort of just adding to the discussion kind of thing. There wasn't much like sort of
okay.
Yeah.
Guys, W's for Omar. Don't hate on Omar.
Yeah, W's on Omar.
Just here having a good time, watching the stream, giving interesting points of discussion. Harry's going to spam so many comments. Yeah, actually do. Like, it's good for the algorithm if you guys like comment a lot. And it's even and subscribe.
Then you're not a real New Crizzos fan.
Oh, you're not a Crizzo.
Yeah, you're not. Nah, that's so bad. Should we talk about the backstory of the New Crizzos? Like
yeah,
the name
that's a good idea.
New Crizzos.
Also, while we're doing it, comment questions or thoughts or stuff so that we have some more stuff to talk about. I finished my presentation.
Literally anything, like, was Jesus God? Like the Trinity? Like anything you want. Okay, so basically the New Crizzos, we were looking for a name, right? And we had like all these different names circulating. What was one of them? Like Culture Clash or something?
Yeah,
like,
that would have been so dry. Culture Clash. I think Collision. I came up with Collision, but then Collision's actually like already a Christian show.
Yeah, and then there was another one. There was like what was it? Like pints, like having a pint.
I wanted to make it like that. We'd just like have a pint and we'd chat about stuff. But then Abraham was like, if we want to have any Muslim viewers ever, we cannot do that. And I was like, yeah, fair enough.
So I sort of like, I was like, right, you've got the New Atheists. Our first video was all about like the New Atheists. So I was like,
and at the time, it was when we were all convinced that there'd been like a 400% increase in church attendance in young men. So like the New Atheists have died.
Yeah.
I still think they've died. I still think there is growth in church attendance in young men, but we thought it was absolutely like dramatic because that's what the statistics had told us before they were debunked. Yeah,
but basically, Tom always like basically called it's not it's technically a slur for like Christians. He just calls them like Crizzos.
I've always used Crizzos. James Acaster uses Crizzos as well. I don't know if he does so in a derogatory form, but I quite like the idea of owning something that's a bit derogatory. Do you know what I mean? There's something quite cool about it that like with the New Crizzos, like it's jokes, it's funny.
Yeah.
And then so it's also a play on the New Atheists, the New Crizzos. it does have its troubles as a name. Like, it's really catchy if you're aged between like I don't know, under 25. But I sometimes tell like these unks at church about the YouTube channel, and they're like, the new Prizzos. I'm like, no, like Prizzos.
And it always autocorrects.
Yeah, always to chorizo.
Chorizo.
Like, oh my days, no one cares about chorizo. Our goal, chat.
It's so bad as well.
Everyone, mark someone needs to clip this. Our goal is to have more Google searches for the new Crizzos than for chorizo. We need to become more famous than chorizo. That's got to be the aim, so that when you write chorizo in the future, it will autocorrect to Crizzo.
Crizzo. We need to get it in the in the Urban Dictionary.
Yeah. And then every time someone wants to eat a Spanish sausage, they get shown a new Crizzo's video.
Yeah. This comment, Omar, thank you for being so respectful. Oh, you've changed it. Well, there we go. Well, before we reply to that one, okay, there we go.
Should we start that?
What was that?
I just started it.
Yeah.
Shout out Omar.
Omar's the guy. Like, if you guys don't know him, like, he's one of my friends, and he, like, every single live since I've like shared the YouTube channel with him, he's like just watched the whole thing and like commenting, and like it's actually crazy. So thank you so much.
It's carried us so hard because sometimes there'll be like 3 people in the chat and we're struggling for stuff to say, and he'll still be asking questions. And then when people join, they're like, "Oh, this is interesting. It's got a lot of engagement." It hasn't. It's just got Omar.
Yeah. Are you wasters watching the YouTube chat? Otherwise, it will be a waste of time.
What do you mean? We're literally like, what? We've literally responded to like every comment. James Dean.
There was a comment about why does it have 1 Z?
Yeah, it has 1 Z, Karis, because there's no standardized spelling of Crizzos. We came up with it, so we wanted 1 Z. 2 Zs looks harder.
It looks a bit nax.
Yeah, I don't know. I prefer 1 Z. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Come on.
God, whoever James Dean is like, bro's starting on us. Get on with it. What do you mean, get on with it? Like,
bro's our first hater.
No, he's not our first hater. You don't look at the comments, lad. We've had a lot of haters.
Yeah, I actually don't. To be fair, we've had some.
I found that, like, so I'm pushing you guys to do your best. Oh, thank you, James. W's in the chat for James. I quite like him now. So I found anytime we do like atheist videos, like they seem to be the most antagonistic.
Yeah.
Have you noticed, like, even on the reel we posted earlier, or the short on YouTube, it's always YouTube, not Instagram. But they were like, oh yeah, but the church, like, the church, like, tortured Galileo, like, you idiot. And it's like, what? Like, even when like we do content that's like Abraham used to be a Muslim, you get Muslim comments that say, "Oh, you were never a Muslim anyway," and it's like, yeah, fine. But I'm sure the like, I don't know if it's the Reddit atheist circles or whatever, but they just seem to like have the harshest comments. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is at all. I mean, like sometimes the worst we get from Muslims is that they keep on accusing us of being Jewish.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? Well, like they're like, oh, you're like agents of Netanyahu. We keep on getting that comment, and I'm like,
yeah. The trouble is that like within sort of like Muslim circles, some Muslim circles, not all, they sort of associate like, because, well, look, Arabs and Muslims, and quite frankly most people, but especially Arabs and Muslims, especially Arabs and Muslims really hate Israel and like what they're doing.
Yeah.
So like Christianity and like Judaism kind of has like ties in their sense to like.
Yeah. It's not offensive. It's not offensive at all. I just find it funny.
Wrong.
Like, we're Christians. Like, I mean, I don't get it. Like, why would a Christian apologist who argues that Jesus was God, like, why would he be accused of being a Netanyahu agent? I just don't get it. It's not that it's particularly offensive.
Yeah.
Any good person is against genocide. Yeah, I mean, that doesn't mean that we're agents of, like, I don't get it. I'm sorry, I don't get it. I don't. Yeah.
By the way, guys, if you actually have any questions about Christianity, we are happy to try to answer them.
Yeah, sorry, James, you came at the end. Like, we're 2 hours deep. I gave this entire, like, look how many quotes. Look how many quotes I had to research. Sorry, but you missed it all. You got this. It will be uploaded. So what you can either do is you can either now go to the start and you can just watch it, or you can it will be posted like as soon as we end, so you can watch it then. So yeah, we spent 2 hours talking about this. So yeah, go knock yourself out, Mr. Dean.
Knock yourself out. I'm really curious about this. Maybe read Revelation 12 and think about who each character is. Like, what? I don't quite understand. Yeah, there we go. Spain won. Spain won. What's the point of that comment? Just, I'm curious.
You do you if you're a replacement theology. Yeah, we're both reformed. So we would. It isn't replacement theology. We would believe that the nation state of Israel today is not the biblical Old Testament Israel.
Yeah, it's the church.
So, yeah. Which is why it's even funnier that we get accused of being like agents of Netanyahu, because like I could see that there are Christian groups that are Zionist, for example. We would not be in that camp at all. Our theological views don't hold us to take any particular view on what's going on in the nation of Israel. We might look at the evidence and say that Netanyahu was doing evil. We might look at it and say he was doing good. We have a theological system that allows us to do either, which I think is the majority Christian position. In dispensational evangelical circles, which are quite highly represented in the US, you get views that are the contrary to that.
Just to respond to the next comment that Malawi made. So you have to believe that the other offspring of the woman is also the woman. So just to clarify, the nation of Israel in the Old Testament has nothing to do with the geopolitical nation Israel. Israel is God's people. Like that's what Israel is, right? It's got nothing to do with geopolitical status. So the offspring of the woman, right, is not like it's got nothing to do with like politics at all. Just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, so David Pawson he teaches a dispensational view. So this is one of the things that Christians can disagree on. This is very much in like the secondary issue camp. We tend to not spend a huge amount of time on these issues on the channel because we are trying to reach non-Christians. We're trying to build up Christians to preach the gospel. We get a lot of viewers with completely different theological views on all kinds of stuff. But yeah, this isn't really our forte. So it's an insult for Muslims, like calling someone a Nazi. But like calling someone a Nazi isn't like, so that would be, that's comparing you to like a ideology that was dangerous and killed loads of people and was terrible. But like to call us like Jewish is like, surely the two aren't. Surely I feel like that's a terrible insult. Surely, if those are the same in that kind of way of thinking. Israel is Israel. So I hear this line of thinking, like you have to often in these like theological discussions, you have things like this, like Israel is Israel, or this means this. But like these terms aren't actually self-evident terms. Like surely like any nation could name itself Israel. So you have to define what these terms mean. And I do think that in many places in the New Testament, the people of Israel the people of the church are described as Israel. You see that's Jews and non-Jews are described as Israel. You see that in many places, like Romans 10, for example. But yeah, if we're going to have meaningful discussion about these sort of things, statements like Israel is Israel isn't going to help, because we don't get anywhere with that.
Yeah.
Guys, just be careful. I don't know, what do you mean by be careful? What kind of? Because are we straying into heresy here? For holding the view that seems to be the majority view in the church until something like the 19th century. I don't know many examples of that view of Israel before the Schofield Bible. So to then come along and say, be careful about this view, it seems to be a novelty view.
Yeah.
I don't know. You've studied this a lot more than I have, actually, Abraham, I reckon.
Yeah, I was just looking for a passage, actually, in the Battle of Armageddon, actually. I was looking for that passage.
Omar's on our side. Shout out. W's for Omar.
I'm listening to a sermon series by Bonnie Bockham at the minute on Revelation. I've almost finished it, actually. I've got like maybe 2 sermons left. But he would draw a he would draw that the 144,000 talked about in Revelation 7 is Israel, in the sense that it's God's holy people. It's those that are sanctified and glorified by God. So, and they when you look into like the sort of the people, I think it talks about the tribes. To my knowledge, it talks about the tribes within the 144,000, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't mention every single tribe in Israel. It mentions other tribes that don't quite make sense, indicating that Israel is both Gentiles and Jews. But I'm, to be honest with you, I'm not like an expert on this kind of stuff. It's something that I find difficult. But what I think is very important to say is that when you look at the Old Testament, when you look at the entire Bible, what you see is that when it talks of Israel, it's distinctly talking about God's holy people. It is not talking about, in any context, the geopolitical state of a nation. It's always talking about God's holy people. The entire Bible storyline depends on that. So I think contextually speaking, when we're looking at who is Israel, it makes more sense that it's just God's holy people.
Nice one. I guess let's park that one because this isn't really our area of expertise, to be honest. I'm not sure if we'll ever make a video on this topic. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. So,
any other questions? Anything else?
Well, I was going to say, tell us about the video you've been working on.
Yes. I'm working on a video at the minute, and it's basically regarding the conversations that we have about Jesus and how best to have them. I have been in these discussions quite a lot about who Jesus is. Was he God? Was he a prophet, for example? And a lot of the time, people obsess over like titles he uses for himself, like Son of Man. What does Son of Man mean? You know, and then looking into all of these different things and looking into Son of God. What does Son of God mean? Right. So it's a lot of the time it's all about his titles. But what a lot of people forget, especially in conversations today, is that
in debate contexts.
Yeah, debate context specifically, especially online, is that it is actually the Bible storyline, and the implicit, the sort of implicit notion of Jesus referring to himself as God, believing he is God. So Michael Bird makes quite an interesting claim that Jesus was conscious that in him, the God of Israel was coming to Zion. So if you look at the Old Testament, you see that when God comes to Zion, he promises to usher in his kingdom. He promises to forgive sin, and he promises to restore the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, when you look at Jesus' ministry, we see that he does all of those things. He seems to embody the God of Israel in his ministry. Now, that's not through his titles that he uses of himself. It's through the language that he uses, through his authority that he has, like saying, "Son, your sins are forgiven," and having authority to do that. So I sort of go into all of those different nuances and explain that actually it seems that Jesus is more than a prophet.
Cold. We've also got another video, but I don't need to explain. We can just run the trailer. Way work.
What? Growing up as a Muslim, I was always told that Allah, God, is one. So why do Christians believe in three gods? Three separate persons. No. Okay.
So you've got three distinct persons.
What's the difference?
Person is the active subject. So the person is the I who acts through nature.
So that means that people believed in the Trinity before Nicaea?
Yeah.
So like who? Where is this? Why can't we see a creedal, clear statement in the Bible, Old Testament or New Testament, that says God is one being, three persons?
Some of the scholars involved in this have said that Trinitarian theology began before the New Testament. Proto-Trinitarianism, which came prior to the New Testament.
John's Gospel is the last Gospel, so surely that would be the highest Christology.
Mark's prologue is identifying Jesus as the one the messenger prepares the way for. Well, the God who has always existed in a union of love steps into human history, and that God comes to rescue us, to bring us into the relationship that's always existed.